Today's scripture reading comes from Romans 13, 11 to 14, and I'll be reading it from the Message. But make sure that you don't get so absorbed and exhausted in taking care of all of your day-by-day obligations that you lose track of time and doze off, oblivious to God. The night is about over. Dawn is about to break. Be up and awake to what God is doing. God is putting the finishing touches on the salvation work he began when we first believed. We can't afford to waste a minute, must not squander these precious daylight hours in frivolity and indulgence, in sleeping around and dissipation, in bickering and grabbing everything in sight. Get out of bed and get dressed. Don't loiter and linger, waiting until the very last minute. Dress yourselves in Christ and be up and about. Pastor Will.
All right. Good morning. This is a fun season, but we're not always ready for it when it comes. And the first Sunday of Advent often has that as the theme, the anticipation, readiness, preparedness. The theme this year is restoration, and you'll see that in the visuals that we're working through, and the displays that we have, and in the stories and the ideas that we're working through. Christmas is different, as I'm seeing all the time, as children age. There's effort when there's chaos. There's an effort to create order and normalcy and stability. And even sometimes a little bit of magic. And then after there's a little bit of momentum from all those previous years, then it almost carries itself. You do the same things you did the years before. The things that you kind of stumbled through before, well, we have to do those again. And then it happens again. And then all of a sudden the ones who were benefiting from the magic are now recreating the magic. For the younger children. And then pretty soon the children have grown up and they're having their own children. They're recreating some but not all of those traditions. And now as we're ready to turn the calendar, we're asking some of those questions again. Okay, should we set up the nativity scene? Should we set up the Christmas tree? Do we want a real tree or a fake tree? All of those questions that in some ways feel trivial, but they are heavier, because within these rituals we find meaning and hope and nostalgia even. Christmas can be made more joyful with the presence of other people, which is of course a reminder that sometimes that's not an option. There are lots of people who don't get invited to places. There are people who don't get called to join a gathering. And so we want to be mindful of those who are carrying the heavy burdens of making Christmas a big event, and they're the people who feel the void of there not being an event. I was reading this week, there's a writer, I've read him before. His name is David Bentley Hart. He's an academic, and I don't say that to show off about all the fancy stuff that I read, but as a warning, just as a way of how do we process these words. But he had a quote, and I wrote it down here. He says, "Most believers more inhabit their faith than reflectively assent to it." So that is perhaps one of the clearest and most approachable things David Bentley Hart has ever written. But it still needs some unpacking. What he's saying is a lot of Christians, we live in our faith. We exist within Christian worship spaces. We participate in Christian religious rituals and events. And we take for granted that all of our beliefs more or less hold together. We do all of those things more than we sit down and we read over the things and we bring ourselves to a position where we agree to them. Now, that sounds a little bit strange, and in some ways we feel, well, they're all integrated. All of the things that we do are rooted in the things that we believe, and it all kind of works out together. Now, as an academic, so he's trying to prove and disprove academic points, more so than anything else. So he has that luxury living in the ivory towers. But what he's saying is, there are parts of Christian faith that other people don't get, and oftentimes Christians are really lousy at explaining those things because it's so natural to them. They don't really even, they're not really even able to explain it, and oftentimes because when you push them, it shows that they don't actually believe those things themselves. So, and some of those are tricky scientific things around miracles, maybe the parts of the creation story, aspects of heaven and hell, those hard things to kind of get our hands on. That's what he's talking about. He says, yeah, we live in these spaces, but we aren't always the best ones to explain them. Now, this quote has gone around, and it's been picked up and repeated by people like me, other pastors. And when we might say it, we, meaning kind of people who stand up here and tell people what to do. I'm not telling you what to do, don't worry. But when we do that, then we're mostly saying, hey, you guys need to take this more seriously. You need to work hard to agree to these things. Which doesn't always work. Just because we want to agree to something doesn't mean that we can. But at the same time, too, we live it out, and we recognize this is a big book, and the book has been around for thousands of years, and we still can't come to an agreement as a faith group, a global faith group, as to what it means. So sometimes we're like, hey, yeah, we're going to do some charitable stuff, we're going to do some neighborhood stuff, we're going to keep our work on our families, we're going to try to make the world a better place. Some of the stuff we get it, we're not going to understand at all. We're going to have to agree to disagree on some of it. But we're going to stick to it even though we don't get all of it. Now, we want it all to fit together. We want to understand it all, but we can't always. And at this Bible conference that I mentioned I was at in Chicago in August, there were only a few pastors and a whole lot of professors, and some of the pastors were explaining, we're talking about this riddle, this puzzle. Why is it that there are these hard questions that even the professors can't answer for us? And the professors are like, well, it's a complicated question. You should be able to play with the gray areas. You should be able to play among the nuances. And the pastors were pushing back and saying, yeah, but our people need clear answers on these questions. So, what do we need? Clarity, or do we need to understand the gray areas? And that's not just an academic question. In our own lives, we have the same things. Within our relationships with each other, there are some hard and fast rules that we want to give each other, expectations of behavior and commitment, but then also this understanding that we're human beings and we make mistakes and we're not going to live by it every time. So, what do we need? Clarity or flexibility? Sometimes both. But I was wondering about this quote from the professor, and I was thinking beyond the academic points about the questions of heaven and hell and creation and salvation, and I was wondering about the Christmas story. So the theme that we're going through, as I mentioned, that we're working through, the material provided from our conference, is about restoration. And we begin this story, we start early on before Jesus is born, before Mary is pregnant. We are just looking at the people of Israel, and they are in between something. Right? They're in between the old covenant and the new covenant. They're in between the old way of doing things and the new situation. But they're also in between the glory days of who Israel has been in the past, with the power and the might and the prestige and the powerful godly kings, and then the future of being subjugated by powers, losing power, losing independence, losing wealth, losing prestige. And the people are calling out. Now, when we think about being in between stuff for ourselves, restoration isn't really always what we're talking about. In politics, we are sometimes invited to think about a grand new future, things that haven't been done before. We think about education, we have to learn new things. When we think about wealth, we have to save up so that we have enough for ourselves, enough to give away, enough for the people close to us. So we need more. We have to be thinking about the future and building up and up. But the theme in various parts of the Bible is restoration, getting back what we had. And so I thought I would go through a couple of Old Testament stories, a couple of New Testament stories. But part of what I mentioned before is as Christians, Christmas is a spiritual time. Christmas is an important time to reflect on the birth of Jesus, an important time to remember the cycles of Jesus' God's blessing on us. But as a culture, Christmas is a celebration. It's a ritual that we participate in, and it seems more magical for children. And that's often because the adults in the lives of those children are making it magical. And the parents, the people who are doing all of those things, they don't do this legalistically. They're not just following the rules. They're not just following instructions from the church. They are creating something magical, not just for the children to experience, but so that the adults get to experience it through them. Some of that magic is lost in my own experience of Christmas. But when we wake up Christmas morning, and there's presents, and there's food, and there's music, it's magical. And I can see the magic in their eyes as much or more than it is in mine, and then I'm almost transported back to when I was a child. Right? Then the magic of Christmas isn't this distant reality that I'm yearning for. I'm trying to get it back. I'm trying to restore the magic of my Christmases to create the next Christmas. So where do we see this in the Bible? In the story of Job, Job experiences loss and tragedy, all as a result of this crazy behind-the-scenes negotiation. It's an incredible story that can be broken down and analyzed. But deep within this story, Job himself doesn't know what's happening behind the scenes. He doesn't know that he's being tested. He doesn't know that God is being tested through Job. He only knows his whole world is falling apart. His children die, his flocks are gone, and his wife is there, but she's making things miserable for him. So Job is poor, effectively alone. There are people with him, but they're not really with him. And there's sort of a happy ending. Does Job live in some wonderful future different from the past? No. Job has everything restored to him. Job has his health restored. He has new children. His flocks come back. Everything is given back to Job. It is restored. Now think about the people of Israel. They are wandering in the wilderness. They've left Egypt behind. And they're going towards what is called the Promised Land. Is the Promised Land some mysterious place ahead of them that they can only imagine what's there? No, the Promised Land is the land that their ancestors inhabited. So they aren't getting some abstract piece of land, they are having land restored to them. And when we think about the parables that Jesus told, so let's talk about the prodigal son. Jesus tells the story of a man who has two sons. You know the story as well as I do. One son is loyal and he works hard and he's always at the farm doing all the right things. And the other son is a rebel. He gets tired of the farm and he wants to go off and live a wild and exciting and fun life. And so he asks for his inheritance money and he disappears. Well, what happens? Do they find their own individual happinesses in a wonderful new future? No, he comes back. The beauty of that family is restored. And when we're thinking about our own lives, we often will think about futures that are different than what we can even imagine, and we can construct those realities in our minds. But often what we want is some kind of restoration. Relationships that are broken, we want them healed. Bodies that are broken, we want them repaired. Wealth that is lost, we want returned. And that's not because there's somehow a failure of our imagination. It's not because we're too weak to imagine something new and better. But it's because we are able to see the beauty of what we had. Now, sometimes that can be a painful thing and a destructive thing, to reflect on only what we had before. Because those things can't always come back. People can't be brought back from the dead. Things that are broken can't always be repaired. But we know the beauty of what we had, and even if we don't get those things back, those people back, that stability back, we still want the beauty of those moments. We want them back. So now here's the story that we find ourselves in, the story of Jesus. Here Israel is yearning for freedom. Not extra freedom, not a different kind of political establishment that works somewhere else. They want freedom and independence like they had before. But it's been a long time since they had that. They're now being subjugated by Rome. Before that, they were under the power of the Greeks. Before that, they had to suffer under the Babylonians. Before that, the Assyrians. Each new conquering kingdom seemed bigger. Their own survival always seemed to be just teetering on the edge. And that narrative continues in the way that the nation of Israel exists now, that they constantly feel that threat, and in global conversations they talk about that threat. And that threat exists in the story we find ourselves now as the people of Israel are getting ready, without knowing it, getting ready to receive Jesus. This is where we find ourselves now, this first Sunday of Advent. That all of the things that we are carrying spiritually, emotionally, mentally, we're carrying these things And we're getting ready, whether we like it or not, whether we know it or not, for the arrival of Jesus to work into our situations. The passage that Laura read for us is from the book of Romans. And it comes after a passage about respecting government, about following rules, about living a good, ordered, decent life. And then this is kind of contrasted there. It says, you're going to be doing those things. You're going to be living a good day-to-day life, but be mindful of the grand picture of time. All of these things will pass. The hour is coming and has already come. The hour is coming. We read into this the passage of the old world and the new, and being kind of stuck in between that. The way that God operated in the past is going to be similar to the way that God operates in the future, but without as much, with a different kind of intervention. The way that things were before, the way that things are going to be, there's going to be a change, and Israel is stuck in between. And we are stuck in between. And in the middle, Jesus will come. Jesus will come and intervene for us. So we can wonder what Paul was thinking about Jesus coming back. But these words hit hard to us when we feel that sense of being stuck. The hour has already come for you to wake up from your sleep. Now our salvation is nearer than when we first had faith. This sense of anticipation, this looming deadline, things cannot stay the way that they are. Things will not stay like this forever, and it cannot and it will not stay, and we can see the deadline, but what's on the other side? And sometimes all we can see beyond it is terror, pain, poverty, all those difficult things. And so we want to put off the deadline as much as possible. But when we trust in God, we can sometimes allow ourselves to see on the other side of that, God is there. We don't know what it means about our stability. We don't know what it means about our health and our relationships. But on the other side of that looming crisis is God. All of our journeys involve a different kind of restoration that we want in the future. All of our journeys will involve different decisions that we have to make and processes that we'll have to meander through. But the end is the same, that God will be with us. God will intervene for us and restore himself to us. So as you're struggling through that in-between time, I hope that you can hold on to hope of restoration. I hope that you can see Jesus working behind the scenes to restore you to what you had before, if not in substance, at least in beauty and in hopefulness. God will reconnect us to God. God will reconnect us to each other. And may we participate joyfully in that reconnection and in that restoration.